Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs and share our experience to hopefully help you have your best game. My house is freezing.
So's ours, but
Yeah, well,
it
yours
normally
is
is this
probably-
time of year.
Yours is probably actually cold, whereas mine is just like sissy Arizona cold. I will
Fair.
I'll accept that. I'll accept that. I don't know why. Just how sometimes you get a chill and you just can't shake it. So I'm gonna try to shake it from the inside out. How are you?
Good, tired.
bet.
Having a new puppy is exhausting.
Yeah, they're like little four-legged children. I refuse to call them fur babies. That's not. They are dogs.
No, that goes too far.
No, they're dogs.
Correct.
But yeah, they do take a lot of attention, and I know that the breed that you got also, in addition to being a puppy, is you got the nexus of two high-energy dogs.
Yeah, the two breeds are perfect for balancing out in almost every way, except that they just compound when it comes to energy.
Oh, how much does this little critter weigh right now?
20 pounds.
And the dog's about 3-4 months old?
Yeah, he won't be more than 40. Like, he'll be 40 or 50 just based on the breeds.
Yeah, that's a good size. That's a good size. You can take it out and romp around in the snow. Your dear sweet wife can take the dog for a walk anywhere she wants, and by the time it's full grown, it will eat anyone who threatens her. So
he's the same size as my brother. He'll be the same size as my brother's Pomsky by the time he's done. So cool. it'll be good. And
you've accepted that he is Saint Vesper, the patron saint of good dogs.
Correct.
All right, cool. All right, good. Oh my goodness. So here we are. And we're going to talk about, you came up with this idea and I dig it. And there are lots of things going on, like call it the pop culturosphere, that I think are related to this. I don't know if they'll come up or not, but you wanted to talk about
canons. So as we always do, start with defining terms. And for me, when I hear the word canon, I think of any major setting, since we use system setting and story. When you think of a setting, the canon is the expected way that events will play out, or when major things in a timeline happen, or major characters. The canon is, this is what is expected to happen, that is not supposed to be deviated from.
And I will add to that, or you tell me what you think about this, the idea that it is an existing fiction. There is a history to the fiction.
Right.
And so much like, say, students of World War II would say, okay, these are the things that happened. These are the things that are of World War II, like as a military event. And therefore, by defining it that way, you're also defining these are the things that are not of World War II as a military event. So there is a history to the fiction. There are limits. There are gates to be kept. I see it the same way. And so now, would you say that you could apply the word canon to a generic fantasy world, or is this more appropriate for existing fictional properties, regardless of where they came from?
I think in the general rule of thumb, it would go more with existing properties, would be my understanding. You could, in theory, have it with a generic fantasy world that someone's created, but the only reason I'm thinking of this is I'm thinking of the guy that I do my solo campaign with, and the world that he plays in is something he's built over over a decade. And so there are things that have happened in the past in the game, like he had started his game world at one time, and then it just got so clogged up with things going on that players were happening, and he tries to keep it pretty consistent, that he had to shift the timeline that in which he usually does a standard start, because he didn't want to affect the canon canon he had created previously. So I think it's possible, but it's not generally how I would apply that word. That would be for, to use an example, and I think one that we should cover, like Star Wars. Like Star Wars canon would be what happens in the movies. Like you're not supposed to change what happens in the Star Wars movies. That is the canon. So just would be my example of, and then Star Wars would be something that has a canon.
So you and I are on the same page then, because your buddy's fantasy world has a canon. It is that which he has created and in conjunction with you. Right. And so if all of a sudden he started throwing in things that were counter to that or destructive to it, then yeah, okay, so you and I are on the same page. Okay, so we're going to talk about canon and where, maybe not necessarily like a set of instructions or descriptions, but like things to consider when considering where to stick with it and how to stick with it, and when and maybe how to not. Just things to consider. Because I think that's worth it. It's on the one hand, if you take an existing property like the Star Wars movies, on the one hand, canon defined as we have can be restricting.
Right.
But on the other hand, it provides the foundation. It is the foundation for the story, for the setting, for the fiction. It's the foundation for that. And it's also the set of ideas and made up facts around which everyone can rally and agree, and therefore have a common understanding that they're going to build on. So where do we want to start? Because I have two general ideas, not about specific properties, but about ways that you could deviate from, or choose to not deviate from. I have like two general ideas, but how do you want to start? Do you want to start with a specific property and pick at it, or did you have something else in mind?
So I just have one more thing about canons that this came to me as we were talking that I just want to point out is I also think it's important to note that a canon tends to also be the like most basic amount of information needed in order to fulfill a property. So I think it would also be possible to say, like, I'm going to use an example that is not perfect, but I think it proves this, that if you're going to use a canon, I think there are examples like the X-Men movies. If you're going to play a superhero style story, there are two different sets of canon for X-Men. So when you are choosing a canon, you need to define what that is at the start, if that's what you're using as a GM. So that's just something I want to point out, because there are some things like X-Men or like Star Trek. Like if you're going to follow...
Or Star Wars.
Yeah, or Star Wars, like the original set of Star Trek movies and the original series, or the Chris Pine movies, if you're crazy and that's what you want to use. Those are set with the same characters, but are different canons. So that was just something else I think is important to note with canon, that there can be multiple canons in a universe that you have to choose between, and you just as a GM need to select which one it is for players. And sorry, that was just something I'm like, that wasn't part of our definition is important.
That makes a ton of sense, because like Star Wars, for example, you have the original 3 movies, and that's all you had for ages. Right. We're not going to talk about the Christmas special. It didn't happen. But all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but then they're starting with the Timothy Zahn Heir to the Empire trilogy. There comes this massive collection of books which inform the growth of what was Star Wars canon at the time through West End Games' D6-based Star Wars RPG. And then when that goes away, and when the prequels come out, that canon kind of sits off somewhere. But when the 3 sequels come out, it's explicitly stated that that stuff doesn't exist. So yeah, that's a really good point. Some properties have multiple threads of canon. So yeah. Regardless, if you're going to choose it, you might have to think which one am I going to choose? Okay. So where do we want to start? Where would you like to start with where to stick with it, or when to not, or what to think about? Ramifications, things like that. Where do you want to start?
I think if you have some general questions, let's start there and go with those, and then maybe go into some more specific examples after that.
Okay. So I'll start with this, and this is a question, and it begs the question too. In that I'm burying my my assertion in the question is, you know, why do you want to follow it in the first place? What do you think? If you're choosing, again, if you're choosing an existing property, and if that property, whether is something that is like, it's Forgotten Realms, or it's Ravenloft, or it's Star Wars, or it's something that you've made up and you have it all here, why would you even choose to follow it in the first place? You could just say, hey, here's this cool world. It has all these bits and pieces. The canon comes from those pieces that are there, but also how they are connected and the movement that they do, like figuratively. Why even follow it in the first place?
So I have two main reasons that come to mind for why you would want to follow an established canon. And I'm just going to stay on the Star Wars thing because that's what we were talking about first. And it's really easy. I think number one is because it gives you defined points to, which is really funny to say about Star Wars, but to kind of keep your players grounded, and these things will happen. Therefore, they have some way to go forward knowing like, okay, like the empire will fall eventually. So it's like they have, and that therefore drives goals. Like, hey, are you going to work with the rebellion and therefore do that? Or are you going to go off and do your own thing completely separate? It gives them at least some player knowledge going into the system that they have a basis for that. The second reason is it also keeps them grounded in the fact of it gives the GM some control to not allow players to just go do whatever the heck they want. So if you go like, hey, this is the Star Wars universe, but you can do whatever you want, and a player goes, I'm going to go kill Luke Skywalker. Like, cool, you can do that. Why? Like, what? As a GM, it's like, okay, now I have to plan this whole like wacky thing of you going and completely changing this. And now I have to come up with what happens in a world where, like, a world that is not of my creation, where that happens. I think it just makes your life as a GM much easier if you're going with a world that has a canon to follow it. And it keeps your players on a somewhat directed path because they know where to go, but it can still be open because most of these settings, the worlds are very large and they have the ability to go do different things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's, look, if there's an existing, let's put aside the project, the massive creative project of the lone GM who comes up with their own world and gives it a name and comes up with a language and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Like, frustrated J.R.R. Tolkien types. Putting aside that, right now I'm only talking about existing settings that exist through literature or through film or television, comic books, something like that. There is some content creator or group of content creators who have sunk lots of time and money into and this thing has grown and survived, even if only with a niche audience. Like Firefly, for example, has a I'd say a smallish but very serious following, whereas Star Wars is much larger, and you have a variety of different types of folks who follow Star Wars. But yeah, using the existing content, if you like it, if it's good, to hang your stuff on is like moving into a new house and being like, I don't need to put up new hooks or a new place to store my umbrella and my jacket because it's all the previous owner's already built a nice one. Like, why bother? I know like you guys are going to add a bathroom to your house. Well, you're adding it because it's not there. Like, but why would you, there are certain things you walked in, you're like, that's fine. We're going to leave that as is. So why not? Why not leverage the work that someone else has already done that other people in your group, like that's one of the hardest things with being a GM is, the challenge of describing a room, the challenge of describing a city or a location without going overboard, or you get so bogged down in the details that, you lose the story in it. And if there is a shared understanding that someone else has already done the heavy lifting for, like, I remember years ago at a local convention, I ran a Star Wars adventure where the characters were rebels on that planet in the Hoth system, and they were out on patrol, and they ran across like evidence of the empire, like, staging on the planet somewhere, getting ready to invade. Like it was some wackadoo thing like that, like, Imperial recon trooper, and then they ended up. So there was a little bit of creeping around and investigation, and then the Imperial assault happens. So the last act of the adventure was the big attack with the AT-AT walkers and all that stuff. And I remember one of my players was super excited because he's like, wait, I want to do it, because as the Imperials are about to overrun them, he goes over and he says, I grabbed the comm, and he goes, Imperial troops have entered the base. Imperial troops have entered the base. If you remember that line, and then it gets cut off. He's like, I said that. He's all excited. And like, why not leverage the good work that some creator, some movie director or television director or author has already done? They know what it looks like. They know what the scene feels like. You immediately can communicate the vibe to them. Use that. And that canon of the not only of what's there, but how the things interrelate it's like a bunch of pre-made modules that you can just put to use.
Exactly. That is my number one reason for picking a canon if you're going to do something, is you just removed, I don't want to say 90%, but you removed a very significant portion of the creation of the world from your shoulders. And you can just go, this is what we're using. And most people, if they are familiar with that canon world, they will know what to do going from there. And it makes your life a lot easier, because when you say we're going to be using Star Wars rules and we're in the Star Wars universe, people immediately have the correct assumptions if they understand Star Wars. And what's great is people can have extreme amounts of like experience with that world or very little, and usually can pick up pretty quickly what they're supposed to do and what their options are and what the general story is of those types of settings.
Yeah, especially any movie or TV. I mean, that's an easy one. Like, let's say you have a group of players and Star Trek's a funny one because everyone is familiar with Star Trek, but because there are so many eras of Star Trek, depending on what you want to run, you may have people like, yeah, I saw a Star Trek movie a while ago. Or, I mean, I've probably seen some episodes, but you run into far more people who are less familiar with Star Trek from direct experience with it. But you could still say, hey, watch this one movie, watch First Contact, watch Wrath of Khan,
right.
And boom, it's communicated. It's not just the look and the interactions, but it's also the feel, the vibe. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, these existing properties that are enduring, like Star Wars and Star Trek and like Middle Earth, they're enduring because they're good.
Right. Well, and that's what is great too, is then it also gives you something that you can say that to players. Like if you were sitting down, you're like, okay, let's play Star Trek, and your players all have different ideas of what Star Trek is. You can tell them, hey, go watch this movie or this collection of episodes, and you'll get a general idea of what the vibe is. And it makes it really easy. Or go watch Star Wars A New Hope, or go watch this or that, or go read The Hobbit, and you'll get the general idea. It makes people's lives a lot easier in getting into the setting. And like we already said, makes your life a lot easier in having to create a setting. You don't have to.
No, something else too. I mean, for me, gaming it's a lot of things, but it's an important social event for me. And consider this: if you have people in your group who are not familiar with a canon of a thing that you're going to run, there's nothing wrong with popping some popcorn and saying, well, before we have session 0, we're just going to watch this movie together and then maybe talk about it. Like, hey, let's do that. Let's have a movie night.
Yeah, well, or a session -1.
Yeah, there you go, -1. Like you could, you guys haven't watched The Expanse yet, have you?
We have not, no.
Okay. Like, so Firefly, I'll use, as an example. Have you watched the Serenity movie yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So
planning on it, but not yet.
Point is, Firefly, you could watch 2 or 3 episodes of that in the time that you would have a game session. And if you're like, let's play Traveler like this.
If you watch the first 3 episodes of Firefly, you have a vibe immediately for what that campaign is going to look like. Just you sit down with the group and you watch that, you're going to know. And I would say the same thing for like if you sit down and you watch Star Trek or you watch The Mandalorian from
Yep.
Star Wars,
Yep.
or like you sit down and watch, I'll use a more recent but one that we did. You sit down and you watch the Dracula series that came out that people really enjoy. Like there are all kinds of things like that that come out and you're like, okay, fantasy setting, sci-fi setting, whatever it is, you can sit down and make that really easy, and it makes canon actually helps you in that way.
So we've established here some of the clear values, the value of canon. And there's nothing wrong, again, if you like Star Wars, you like Star Trek, you like Lord of the Rings, you like Ravenloft or something, like, why not build on the work that others have done? You don't have to sit down and make up all your own stuff. That's
Correct.
Okay. You'll have, as GM, you'll do enough making up of stuff as your players interact with all of this. But so we've established the value of it and maybe some ways to connect with it quickly. Where do you think you cross the line, or where do you think you deliberately decide to say, okay, let's invert this, let's put this aside, let's change this? We are playing in this world, but
Correct.
We're going to do this other thing instead.
Yeah, for me, and this goes with two completely different things. I want to define these terms too. So to me, when I'm thinking about that, there are two different things that you can do with a canon, other than just sticking completely with what's there. You can either stick with it, bend it, or break it. And those are all very important things, because to me, bending a canon is okay. We know what's going to be going on here. We're going to make things slightly different. So as an example, some people really like to stick in the locations that major things happen, like on Hoth. That's an example. Bending canon would be, okay, you're the character that's over the PA system, even though we have no idea about that. Yes, technically, like, we don't know who that is. It's an unnamed character. You can do that, but it's kind of a bend of the situation because we don't have all this background. Breaking the canon would be, okay, your people show up and they actually like help Luke Skywalker escape the Wampa without hearing Ben's voice. Like they just go and they get him. That would be breaking canon. So he doesn't have that interaction with the Force Ghost when he does, which might affect major things in the game. Like that actually could affect the timeline. So I think there's a difference between bending or breaking and a completely different thing. Like I said earlier, maybe there's a character that dies for some reason, and then you have to deal with the consequences of that. But you might plan that as a GM. So there are some different ways to move away from canon than just like, hey, we're going to completely do away with it or we're going to stick with it. You can also kind of bend it to your needs.
I am going to add two things to that. I think of so bend, like, I don't think that having the with the calm thing in the Hoth battle, that's not bending. That changes nothing to me. That changes absolutely nothing about it. That to me is actually a moment I would call surfing the canon, where you are fleshing out or using aspects of the story that exist, but you are grafting something onto it or helping move through. You're moving through that part of the story with your characters, but in a way that doesn't actually change the stated history of the setting. You know, and I've done that plenty of times in Star Wars. I've done that with. I've run some historical horror games. I had a historical horror session. I've run it several times with a couple of different systems where the British are in league with like a voodoo priestess who is using like zombies to kill Sons of Liberty in 1775 New England, and they have to the characters have to thwart this. And in so doing, it happened. There's a whole, like, a timetable, and they're rushing against time to thwart this in order that the attack on Breed's Hill, better known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, can take place. So there's everything that's happening. I'm surfing the real canon of our history here by adding this, by grafting this like weirdo history to it. I've done that with, I've done that in Octoon Cthulhu. So you're not changing anything, but you're adding pieces to it that are off the stage.
You're building on it.
I'm building onto it, but I'm actually like, imagine if you're sitting in a theater and you're watching the movie. I'm adding things that happen off screen but are directly related to things on the scene, but on the screen, but don't change what's on the screen at all. So there's that. Bending it would be, yeah, maybe making some minor changes to the existing canon, like maybe what characters were present when something happened, so that you can have your player characters there, or maybe like a minor rearrangement of sequencing of things so that your characters could have experienced something or been around. And then obviously breaking it is just throwing it right out and doing something completely different, like, your character destroys the Death Star or something like that. That, and it sounds to me like you are loath to do that.
I am very much
sure
so.
am too. Because why bother having I have the canon if you're just going to say, let's just throw it, shred it.
The only time that I think it's okay to break a canon, in my opinion, is if you are going to immediately shelve whatever you're doing as soon as you're done. To be like, this was our crazy, wacko Star Wars story that somehow you ended up being the person to blow up the Death Star, and now we're never touching it again. Because I, as a GM, do not want to try to figure out what happens when you are now Luke Skywalker. Like that, it just everything becomes so much crazier for me to try to have to build that inside of, like you were using the house example earlier. Like, I don't want to knock out all of the supporting walls inside of a house, have it stripped down to nothing, and then have to rebuild everything on the inside.
Yeah, why
That's
bother?
So much work. Exactly. Why bother? And it's a waste of time.
Oh, I love Star Wars so much, I'm going to trample on it.
Exactly.
I love Star Trek so much, I'm going to jack it all up.
Right. Now, I think bending is great where it fits. But yeah, breaking for me is if you're doing it, it's a one-time thing at the very end. Okay. You do not do that throughout a campaign or an adventure or whatever. You try to leave that.
I could see that. So yeah, bending, like I'm surfing, that's my place. That's my niche often when it comes to, like, the closer I get to story canon. And I guess you could maybe separate and say there's story canon, but then there's setting canon. Like Star Wars has the Empire and then the Rebellion, and then it's got these different planets, and it's got, parsecs being confused for whatever. That's what Star Trek has, setting canon, but then it has story canon. I tend to prefer in existing IPs that, like, I stick with the setting canon. I don't jack with that at all, because why bother playing the setting if you're going to just jack it all up? Story canon sometimes, though, I will, like the Star Trek campaign that I just completed, we took place during the Dominion War. And initially I had an idea that I was actually going to incorporate, like they were gonna be more involved in it. And I gave them a choice, and they decided to not. If they had, they would have moved through Deep Space Nine. And there might have been some interaction with some of the characters on Deep Space Nine, or at least like a brush with them. Not to like show it off, but just because if they were, command crew on a ship moving through Deep Space Nine, they would probably meet with some of the command staff of the station. And to me, again,
that would just make sense.
Yeah.
Like you just need to.
Yeah. And again, that would give me an opportunity to go back and watch some old DS9 episodes and maybe surf that canon to find places where they could be involved in those things. So we have surf, bend, break, and break. I'm not, I mean, why bother breaking the world canon or the setting canon warp drive actually, why?
Or like the whole, and this is an example I'm going to use, is I've done things with Star Wars where people are always like, well, I'm just going to design my ship to not do everything facing forward like all of the other ships in Star Wars do. It's like, yes, but that's part of like the universe, is that's a design for a reason, and you're trying to break the reason to make yourself have an unfair advantage.
Yeah,
that's not how that works. Like you stick with the way that it works in the setting.
My last piece is it would be closest to bend, and that is a mood shift.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, and I have not done this with Star Wars, um, horror,
Mm-hmm.
not Star Wars.
Right.
But
it's not traditional Star Wars, no.
but could you have horror element? Could you do that in Star? You could.
There
There's like
are
there.
books.
Yes, there are. There are. But it's not the norm. Um, I'm not a big fan of. I like comedy. I like funny stuff. I don't like sitcoms, and I don't like forced funny. Like I can't stand Star Trek Lower Decks. I think it is insipid. There. That's all. I don't even have anything I can add to it. It is simply insipid. Um, but you could take something serious and decide like, hey, we're going to kind of run this a little lighter deliberately. And to me, that's a mood shift or an inversion of because canon also I think brings with it a certain vibe.
You're right. And that's where I think mood shifts can work in certain situations. And I'm going to use an example of like if you use the world of Starship Troopers. If you watch the movies of Starship Troopers, it is a very different mood than the book Starship Troopers.
You mean it's good? Like the book is good.
Right.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, but one has a much more comedic mood than the other. So I think you can do it, and certain people will like it, and maybe it can be a fun palate cleanser. But yeah, I agree. It's very hard to mood shift and not be creating your own thing. Like if you build something that is meant to be a comedy, great.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a comedic type of setting / canon, perfect. But it's really hard to shift something like I'm trying to think of a good like Octoon Cthulhu into a comedy.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work because it's a horror.
It's a different that's pulp horror action.
Right.
Now, this is not to say that you cannot have funny interludes or moments or story elements. That's not I'm not saying that. I'm saying when you actually do something to like structurally shift the mood of like an entire story.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if you try to force the wrong mood on a certain campaign, it's not going to work. Like you can't play Curse of Strahd and have it be funny. That's not the point.
That's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, but see, it won't feel right for the players or the GM.
Okay, and so this is where this comes to my comment, and I'm not going to harp, but my comment earlier about like there's been a lot of stuff, at least that I've seen in the pop culturolo sphere, that is related to this idea of like canon, and I'm talking about Starfleet Academy. I don't know what you've seen of this new show. I'm not going to talk about it. But there is a lot of talk about it because there are a lot of complaints that it's not really Star Trek. It has the trappings of Star Trek. It has the races and it has the ships and it has the setting and it has story canon elements, but otherwise it is in no way Star Trek, and therefore it has broken the canon completely. So there's all kinds of people stuff flying around about that. But yeah, I think that you again, you can inject, say, comedy, for example, into a. I actually find comedy is sometimes a great way to draw contrasts in a horror game. You throw in some really like dark humor, dark humor or some kind of moment of absurdity, not silliness or stupidity, but absurdity, and it actually contrasts with like just how horrible this thing is that's going on, and you've got but yeah, if you try to like mood shift the whole thing, to me that just breaks the canon. And if your intention is to break the canon, why use it at all? And then say, well, we're playing Star Wars, but
right. Well, and that's where like I just finished the Death Station adventure in Traveler. I would say that Traveler is not a horror setting. It is a sci-fi adventure setting. So when you have an adventure that is horror, it's really cool because it's a tone shift for 3 or 4 sessions that you have lots of fun doing. And then you can go back to the thing that you expect and maybe shift a little bit here or there. But That's what mood changes are for individual sessions or maybe a short adventure that you can do a tone shift as a palette cleanser without having to change the system. And that's the thing that sometimes makes it better is it's like if you really don't want to shelve a campaign in order to do something different, like you're just not at that point, everyone's still having fun, sometimes a slight mood shift for a very short period of time can be good. But general rule of thumb, yeah, I would put an incorrect mood shift for too long and the same level as just straight up breaking a canon. There's no reason to do it.
And actually, a short term mood shift, either for an adventure or a piece of an adventure, or maybe like a story thread within an adventure, a mood shift could actually help you spotlight what makes the canon, the system, the setting, what it is, because you draw this. There's this thing that's at odds with it. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that, and yeah, if people, it could be, one of the things that we ran into with the Star Trek campaign, and it wasn't a problem, but it definitely stood out after a while, is that Starfleet, to play a proper Starfleet officer, there's a certain like we follow Starfleet's rules. That doesn't mean we all interpret them the same way, but we're all trying to follow them. We're all kind of earnest in a like kind of Starfleety sort of way, and that creates limitations, and there's only so much you can do to work within that. I mean, you could provide some story elements and story options within an adventure or episode that would help give players opportunities to come at that issue from different angles and like struggle with it and work through it. But yeah, having something like dark in a like really dark in a setting that is usually more like action, like the person gets punched and they fall over. When the stormtroopers get shot, they just fall over. You know what I mean? We don't see their faces get blown up. They're not falling down. They're screaming for their mothers or their clone chamber or holding their guts in as they die or something. They just fall over dead. So if you inject something dark for a moment into that dark element, will actually be that much stronger within the story because it stands out so much. If you were running Call of Cthulhu and you had something that was genuinely like witty and funny within it, related to some kind of horror from beyond time and space, I think it would make that much more standoutish because it sits so strangely alongside the googly-eyed tentacled beast that's about to devour you.
Yeah, it actually like can make things more unsettling, which sometimes is what you want to do is you want to upset the apple cart a little bit for your players so that they don't just get into this dreary, I'm following the same thing every session. That way they can actually get into the story a little bit more.
But again, if you can upset it, you can shake it, you can take it down a bumpy road, but if you flat out destroy it, you don't have an apple cart anymore.
Right. Like, yeah, if you pull the wheels off and light them on fire, you have a fire now. You don't have an apple cart.
Well, let's see. What else? Is there anything else? Because I think this is good. I think we've hit some important things in that. I'm a firm believer in if you're gonna accept and use an existing setting, use it for what it is.
Yeah.
And and if you're using existing stories like Star Wars or Star Trek, surf them, bend them, maybe sometimes invert the mood. But why bother using the thing if you're just going to stomp all over it?
No, I agree. That's where I was going to say maybe we should do some examples, but we did use Star Wars as an example of a surf and a bend and a break. So we've seen exactly what that looks like. And we've covered like things like Star Trek, where there are a lot of different options, and all of these same things apply to any of the options, whether you're playing the original series or Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or any of it. Like if you're using that as the canon, that you're following the story, and each of those have different things they build on as you go through them, but still all of the same rules apply for that. I think Star Trek's also fun because the television series have mood shifts in the episodes. So if you
Yeah.
want to know how to run a horror or
Yep.
a comedy or something in any of those, it's really easy to see how to do that with Star Trek.
Hmm.
But yeah, it that really is my thought with canon is use it, don't abuse it.
The last thing I thought of, and this was an example that we haven't talked. Well, you've never played this, so but the idea of like, okay, we're going to deliberately subvert the mood. Not going to change the canon at all for the setting or the story, but we're going to deliberately subvert the default and expected mood it'll be fun for just, and then we're done with that. I did that many years ago. I ran a short arc. I think it was 4 or 5, maybe 6 sessions at most of Vampire the Masquerade. And Vampire is very serious and brooding and moody, and like you're listening to The Cure and Nine Inch Nails, and it's the mid '90s, and you have acid wash jeans and all that kind of stuff, and eyeliner, whatever. Never wore eyeliner. Um, and so we ran this. I ran this story that took place in Las Vegas, and all of the vampires who were like the lead vampires in Las Vegas were like losers and freaks. Like, I'm not going to go into it. I'm just not going to go into them. Not for the public audience, but they were just losers and freaks. Like, because I hit this moment. I remember that when I was running. Like, I personally hit this moment in reading White Wolf's canon. Like, all the vampires are so cool and sexy and all this stuff, and I was like, no. I'm going to run some freaking loser vampires.
And they all congregated.
And it was hilarious. And they were all in Vegas because it was like all these like mutants, geeks, and trolls that hang out on the Vegas Strip anyway. Who would notice? And the player, I only had 2 players, and one of them was the vampire clans. One of them is the Malkavians. The Malkavians, their weakness is that they're crazy in some way, shape, or form. And so he was an Elvis impersonator who was absolutely convinced that he was Elvis. And so the other vampire, I forgot what clan he was, but he was like his manager. He was Red. And so it was the 2 of them. Here he was, this Elvis impersonator who was a vampire in Vegas, and it was hilarious. So because we had so much fun, and we had all played Vampire a lot. So we had so much fun deliberately subverting all of just the overwrought, overly serious, eyeliner wearing drama kid stuff.
Well, that's one thing I think that's one thing that does work though, since we were talking like don't break, but I think you can break if you have a group of people that know the setting and the canon well enough and all at the same level. Like, it's no fun if you have like a GM that's like super into this canon and they just know so much about this canon and nobody else does. And then they make some subtle change that, oh my gosh, I can't, like, can you believe I changed this about the canon? Everyone's like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Or drop some reference. So like, and I think unfortunately that can really, Middle Earth, Star Wars and Star Trek, if you have a huge disparity in whichever canon you've chosen, if you have a huge disparity between some members of the group, especially GM to players, there can be all kinds of things like hints, accusation, allegations, things that you'll drop. It flies right over people's heads because they don't get it at your level. But I think you're right. If you have people who see it the same way or generally or have experience with it in the same manner, you could do something with it all together and have a lot of fun.
Right. And that's kind of another like very rare instance where extreme bending to breakage can almost be okay, is if you have a small enough group of people that all know something pretty much to the same level, that they all understand this is not going to be what we're not signing up for the original setting on purpose as a group. Like that is kind of the other exception is, hey, we all know this going in, let's do this because it's going to be fun for us, because we can all kind of make fun of this setting that we love in a way because we want to change that canon in that setting.
All right, we've solved all the problems of the canon world.
Or at least we've answered enough of them.
But I think those are things to think about. And like, so yeah, surf, bend, don't break, maybe subvert, but only for a short period of time. I think you can do the first two, bend, surf and bend. You can do those
as much as you want,
effectively for long, much as you want. And if you really, really want to change things, I mean, obviously in your own group, if your people are all on board with it and cool with it, and do it. It's all made up anyway. But why bother?
Yeah,
why bother choosing something in order to break it?
And that's the other great thing about, if you do break it too much, you guys go, okay, we messed that one up a little bit. Let's just go back to the correct thing and start over, because you can do that. And that's the great thing about a made up story that you're playing together with your friends is, okay, we took that one a little too far. Let's set it off to the side. We broke that world a little too much. Let's go back here. And that's fine.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough one. But it is possible, because this is all in our heads. It actually is possible to say, you know what, that didn't work. We got kind of invested in it maybe, but let's take a breather. Let's take a 5-minute break and let's rewind and let's reset. All right, cool. Well, everybody listening, comments, what do you think about this? What have you done with either surfing, bending, hopefully not breaking, maybe subverting? What have you done and what do you think? We would love to hear from you. I would love.
Oh no, I'd love to hear from everybody.
Thank you as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes.